everybody? It's your man, Adam Cruz, DJ, producer, author of the brand new book, Free the Music Business, Tips and Tales from an Indie Music Nerd, available everywhere now. You're tuned in to Soul Booking Cool, so keep it locked right here.
So fucking cool.
It's so motherfucking cool to listen to So Booking Cool.
Welcome to So Booking Cool, it's Jewel B. In this episode, I chat with a music pro and enthusiast. He is a DJ of jazz, funk, Latin, and soulful dance music, and has worked with the godfather of disco, Mel Sharon, Grammy Award winner Louis Vega, Kenny Dope Gonzalez, dance music's own Kevin Hedge, and Tony Award winner Lilius White, to name a few. He is the founder of the indie record company Mixtape Sessions, as well as the Mixtape Sessions Music Conference, which addresses topics related to artist health, wellness, financial literacy, industry trends, and more. He is the co-owner of the Honeycomb Music with dance music legend Josh Milan. You can catch him on his weekly show, Freedom Radio Hour. His book is called Free the Music Business, Tips and Tales from an Indie Music Nerd. He is Adam Cruz. Stay tuned for our conversation only on So Booking Cool. Hello, Adam.
Thank you for having me on your program. I love how you said my name. Very with conviction. I love that. Adam Cruz. Yes.
Yes, thank you. And and I know who I'm talking to, So Adam, speaking of creatives, because as I just mentioned, you have dedicated your book to creatives all around the world. What kind of time do you think that this has been for creatives, in light of the pandemic and the social unrest?
I think it's been a transformative time. We have two things at play, in my opinion. One is the theory of how things are working out for artists during a pandemic. And the second is the real life effects of artists trying to cope through a pandemic. So first, the theory. The theory is essentially, we're talking about two different types of artists during a pandemic. The one is called the embraced artist or the embraced musician. And then the other is the impacted artist or the impacted musician. So let me give you the difference there. So during a pandemic time, there are some artists that are making lemonades out of lemons, so to speak. They are at the forefront of trying to take full advantage of their art meeting technology. And so they are hosting virtual coaching sessions that they'll make income that way. If they're a singer, they will be on a virtual songwriting session. Perhaps they are hosting a virtual concert with a link to drop some cash in their Cash App. Perhaps they're using the time to develop more videos or issue merchandise or new products, new songs, something like that. So that's the embraced musician, the embraced artist. The impacted artist is quite the opposite. That is the artist that is near paralysis, nearly paralyzed during this pandemic. He or she is quite unable to do most any status quo checking in with their artistry. They are very little movement is happening. They're not very productive. So in theory, as an artist or a musician, we're probably both, meaning that we are struggling through the paralysis that happens with artists regardless of the pandemic time. And then the other is to try to break through and then create productivity in your art, despite the fact that everything is very different. Now, quickly, I wanted to talk about the live part. Remember, I talked about the live effect. So I'm talking theory about the impacted or embraced artist, right? But in real time, artists are severely impacted by the fact that venues have closed their doors because you can't socially distance indoors like you would normally, like at a club setting or a theater, small theater. And so quite literally, they have had their livelihood taken from them because most of the artists that I'm encountering depend heavily on touring, any sort of live in-person engagement to make money from. So that's the real thing. There is some talk, and there have been some prototypes out there for socially distanced concerts, especially one that was in Arkansas fairly recently. But I don't think we're nearly in a place where we can talk about reopening. And unfortunately, most of the venues now will end up being closed indefinitely because they can't sustain themselves.
Wow, that was so insightful, Adam. Do you think that in this age of having people having to work and be creative with the virtual side of their craft, do you think that that has all been a benefit that could go on even once the pandemic is over for artists?
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes the creative fields are a microcosm of the wider world, right? So, in other words, what you see now in companies like Google and Twitter and others that are uh, have transitioned to a 4-day work week and plan to continue to do so. In the music business, you're seeing a lot of that agility, a lot of that adaptability, simply because you can't have in-person meetings like you could once upon a time. You can't meet at the local restaurant or bar or what have you to negotiate a deal or whatever it is. You can't go to the meeting at that corporate building. So I think right now everybody's forced to be resourceful, and I think it's a great time. I'm actually quite optimistic because of the way music and art and technology is all coming together now, in a very intentional way, because we don't have a choice. So I think there's a big bright spot on that. But in general, I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the music business, because powers that be long held the belief that you had to be in person at work in order for this to work. You know, that old model of 9 to 5. You know, in front of a desk all day long, and that's out the window now. I think what we're looking at is quite a different paradigm, and I think it's positive mostly.
Mhm. And speaking of, music and the industry, I know that you have a belief that music needs to be understood and respected, not only as a creative art form, but also as a product with a value. So can you just tell us more about this and why this is important?
Yes, I talk about it in two ways. One is when music became digital initially. I'm talking right as we sort of ended our love affair with vinyl and CD, etc. We started to move towards digital. But this happened at the behest of computer companies, Apple in particular. Apple had a product to sell, their iPhone or iPad or whatever it was initially, and they needed to fill it with content. So what I feel is the label had no idea to have any forethought about the music business and what was going to come with the digitization of music. Apple seemed to really have a strong vision for itself. And so the labels really made only minor points with the computer companies before they agreed to have their music available on the Apple services. So on the one hand, we let go of our value of our content when we did that, because we essentially cut ourselves at the knee by letting computer companies dictate how we were going to consume the music that we owned. And a prime example of that is how, remember, it used to be where you bought a record, you had to buy the whole album or the whole CD, even though you might have only cared for one or two songs. Now, after this intervention from the computer company to the record label, now you have per track downloads for the first time. That they introduced that idea of 99 cents a download. That has nothing to do with record labels. That was computer companies going, I think 99 cents will work. And the labels went, okay. So I feel like in one way, we let our value go away in the music by allowing computer companies, tech companies, to dictate not only how we were going to consume the music digitally, but how much they were willing to pay for that music. The second thing that we did was undervalue what I believe is the strongest argument to date, which is music as a therapeutic quality. We often point to big pharma, we point to certain pills, Xanax, et cetera, for dealing with anxiety, depression. There's a lot of medication that are being fed to us in terms of marketing, but we do not have that same push and drive for prescriptions around music. It may sound silly when you think of it, but it's proven studies out there, many in fact, over the decades, that have linked um, uh, positive results of things like depression and anxiety after exposing oneself to certain kinds of music. Classical in particular has been cited in many a study. So why aren't we looking at music in the same way that we look at big pharma? So I think those two places is where we lack value in music.
And music, you never went to therapy, at least not as a child, but you had to cope with some of the things that your parents had gone through, and not having your father, your mother was ill and everything. So music was a way to help you cope. Is that right, Adam?
Yes, and I think that was the first time as a kid. I lost my dad tragically in an accident, but it was very strung out time. He was in a coma for a year before he passed. So as you can imagine, that was a very gut-wrenching, very traumatic time for me. And I found quickly that music spoke to me, and the lyrics quite literally was talking to me of like, one day we'll all be free, things will get better, that kind of thing. So those messages in the lyrics of the songs that I would hear on the radio spoke to me like a friend. And when I realized that that was happening to me, meaning I was experiencing this strong connection with music and the lyrics, that's when I realized that, oh, this is the therapy that I'm going to need, because I'm Puerto Rican, and I don't know about your background, but in my family, let me say, we have a culture of silence where we don't seek therapy. We do not advocate for psychotherapy in any way. And as a matter of fact, we poo-poo that often amongst family members, and we pivot towards prayer as the only therapeutic quality. But I disagree, and I always have. Music is my primary therapist, but I have been in therapy for many years, and that too has proven to be vital in my life. So if you can imagine, I have two therapists, music and an actual therapist.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely true. I will say, especially in groups of people of color, it does seem like sometimes traditional therapy is kind of frowned upon. But as somebody who has had it both, like traditional therapy as well as the kind that music listeners can get, that you have had, do you think one is more beneficial over the other, or is there overlap?
You mean in the kinds of music? No, I don't think that there's any difference in the value or the benefit to it. It's funny that you say that, because going back to my upbringing, I grew up Pentecostal, and Pentecostalism is a very much a fundamentalist Christian sect, meaning that there were very strict rules about the kind of media you could engage in. So if you can imagine, as a kid like me, dealing with trauma as a young person, using music as therapy, I would go to church and get the opposite message, that the devil was in the music that I loved. So right there was like a break for me. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that I feel like there ought to have been more talk than about the power in music and all of the different facets that could bring you life. But particularly, it was frowned upon of any sort of songs with profanity in them, which as an adult, sometimes you need a good curse word to get that word out. I'm not opposed to that, And the second thing is like, there's like heavy metal music or any harsh sounding music that was automatically akin to the devil. And I just didn't understand that. That was like decibel. That wasn't style. Metallica has a lot of classical derivatives and very beautiful music. It's just you don't get to experience that if you're a Pentecostal, because it's frowned upon, and you actually will be put on what's called discipline if you're caught engaging in this kind of thing. Films, clothing, lots of things are against that religion.
How long after, when you realized that music spoke to you and you found that you could connect to the characters and the stories, or you just found it interesting, how long after that did you decide to pursue music?
Okay, so my cousin, who was 7 years older than me, was a DJ in the Bronx. So at 10 years old, when I'm 10, he was around 17 or 18. He gifted me his DJ equipment, meaning his 2 turntables and his record collection. And so that was sort of my first time getting a taste of what it felt like to DJ. And then I had little friends here and there that would pay me to DJ at their backyard party. And so that was the first time that I realized I could make money DJing. But when you talk about professional music, that happened after I started to work at the first record label that I was a part of. I was a production assistant at Masters at Work Records. They're called MAW for short, and they're run by Little Louis Vega and Kenny Dope Gonzalez. They're both Grammy nominated, and Louis, as a matter of fact, is the Grammy Award winner. Anyhow, so I got a chance to be their production assistant at their label, and you kind of learn, Jewel, a bunch of the different angles of the jobs at a label when you're at that level, because you're basically the everything person. So it was after that experience, and that was like 2002, I had realized that I was going to do it professionally, that it was going to be a part of my life that wasn't like a hobby, it was a much more serious.
So what were some of the steps that you took when you decided to take music seriously, whereas when it was just a hobby?
Yeah, great question. I didn't have a lot of money, so I couldn't afford to buy like what I have today, meaning like Pro Tools, which is like a software application to use to produce music, a certain keyboard, all of the microphones and all that cool stuff that I have now. I couldn't afford any of it. So I started by buying things in piecemeal when I could afford them. I would go to thrift shops to buy equipment. Um, I I could afford it. So how did I get started? I had a laptop, a crappy laptop that I would import music into WAV files, and I would cut up the WAV files, the audio file, to try to recreate a song. So it was my way of taking what I had done as a kid with the pause tapes. I don't know about you, Julie, but I used to love to record stuff on the radio, and then I would create a pause tape. It would be my own little mixtape of songs that I would hear on the radio. And so I would apply that same approach, but digitally, and I would copy and paste certain parts of songs to recreate it. And that was my first foray. Fast forward time, it wasn't until 2007 that I was gifted some money, and I used that money to buy equipment. And from there, I started to work at a feverish pace. And most of the time, I had no idea what I was doing, but I would try anyway. And out of that came my sister's first album. And then when I got to learn some more, I started to work on my own album. And then I went back to school in 2010 so that I could get the knowledge, that education behind what I was doing. So I quite literally learned, oh, that knob that I was turning to the right, that's called gain. Oh, okay, yeah. And so you know these things a bit as a DJ, but you don't really know the words and the theories until you get educated. And so I did that in 2010. And that helped me tremendously to dive deeper into engineering and audio and all of those things.
Wow. Were there any books at all that also gave you education about the music business?
Yeah, absolutely. To this day, Donald Passman, Everything You Need to Learn About the Music Business. He's had several versions. I've had several drafts. They're all around my studio. There's one over there I can point to actually now. But Donald Passman, I read a lot. And I also started to read a bunch of biographies of people that I admired, whether it be about wealth management, whether it be about A&Ring, meaning artists and repertoire, how you sign music, how you find acts that could work for your label, things like that. I started to read about Quincy Jones, his autobiography, Russell Simmons. I really resonated with me with his autobiography in particular because he taught me that if you want to be rich, if your goal is to be really wealthy, you actually have to learn the art of giving. And I didn't know that. And wealth was attached to giving. And you kind of know it just by nature. If you grew up just wanting to be generous in any sort of way, you have this spirit already in you. But he said it so astutely. So when I read that, that stuck with me to this day. So I always try to be involved with charitable organizations or philanthropy as much as possible. I even sometimes will pair my releases with a charity because I feel strongly about what Russell Simmons was talking about. But yeah, there's a myriad of other books that are about this topic, marketing and music. I spent a lot of time at Barnes and Nobles in the music section, so do that, you know?
So you definitely, do you recommend that people who are interested in the music business, that they read these books that can educate them?
Yes, if you want to talk about recommendation, let's go in. So number one, yes, find yourself at those bookstores and read those sections of material. You will always get information. If you're a person like me that's on the go and you don't have the time, find yourself and get yourself a subscription to an audiobook service. Audible is one. And you should find a myriad of topics of your choosing that you could listen to. The other thing is to sign up for seminars of your choosing that are in the fields of your interest. So if I'm in music, so I often will join things like the New Music Seminar or the Winter Music Conference or Miami Music Week or go on. And later in life, I even started to produce my own music conference. So think about what you can do to remain a student of your craft. The third thing I want to mention is getting involved with other people that do what you do, especially if they're doing it well. That's the critical thing. So don't involve yourself just with like-minded people. Involve yourself with like-minded people that are successful doing what you want to do. Because that took me a long time to realize that the people I was networking with, not everyone was being successful, and yet I was in the throes of that. So if you can imagine, if you want vision, if you envision success for yourself, yet you're surrounding yourself with everyone else who it hasn't achieved what they need to, you need to reassess who you're hanging out with. So that I'm speaking to myself now. And so that's some of the things I learned.
What are some of your networking tips then for trying to connect with people who are successful, in music?
I pay attention to what they do. I pay attention to the activity. I study them. Um, I definitely do that with the music I love. If I want to sound like a certain quality or sonics level, I will listen to those songs that have that quality and find out what I can do to get to that level. And I don't mean copy it, but I certainly mean emulate in terms of the sonics, the sounds of things. So yeah, and the other tip is, and this doesn't happen right away. You often will have to fail, but I encourage you to fail fast. I'm sure you've heard that before. Fail fast because that gets you closer to winning. And you want to start winning by identifying who in your circles are taking things to the next level, and keep yourself aligned with those people. And also take inventory with your current network and figure out, of these people, do you still have value in it? I know it sounds a bit harsh, but you have to look at things in a business way too. It's not just friendships and allies. You have to think about what's going to work for your brand and your business ahead. And I learned that part of what I was doing was not helping myself. And what I mean is, I was involving myself with great people, but they weren't successful. And I needed to find references of success to make it work for me. And when I started doing that, Jewel, it really helped me.
And when you're saying success, Adam, you're all, because you just mentioned it, you're speaking to people who are trying to level up.
Right.
Right. And they have.
I think success, first of all, is depend on your definition of success, right? For me,
Right.
What can I do to create a series of a portfolio of income that gets me to a livable wage? And so the way I did it was a few ways. I always try my best to have passive income in several areas in my professional life. What does that mean? That means that I would set up things like a merchandise website, and I have a free app with my music and my merch there, my episodes of a music business show that I put together. I produce a music business show. I blog, I vlog, I try to engage with others around the topics of interest. I talk about these very things online often. And so all those things together, including keeping a main job. I don't know if you've ever seen the Lifetime movie, The Clark Sisters. Love that movie. But one of the main things that I learned was that one of the sisters, Jackie Clark, was the one sister who kept her day job as a nurse, if you remember. And so I'm here to tell you all that let's let go of the romance of what an artist is today, and let's keep our mainstay so that we don't have fiscal pressure to pursue our creative interests. What am I saying here? I'm saying keep that day job so you have a steady check coming in so that you can work on your craft, take these courses, join those seminars, network with the right people, spend the time that you need to without feeling like, oh man, I need to do something quickly for some money, because that's usually the way to not be successful. If you go at it with money in mind, you're not going to do well. If you go at it with trying to heal yourself through the process, then you're way on your way to being successful. And that all depends on what you define as success.
And you mentioned biopics, music biopics in particular. So do you also watch shows about music, like scripted shows? Have you ever watched Empire?
Yes. Yes, I have. But that's more, I have to be honest, that's more for like kicking back entertainment. For real taste, I'm really trying to, because I do radio personality work, I study radio personalities that I admire because I want to be better about delivering content. Again, I study the music that I love. I spend a lot of time listening to Rod Temperton. If you don't know who he is, look him up. Michael Jackson is one of his greatest credits. I listen to Quincy Jones. I try to listen to Earth, Wind, and Fire. I try to listen to Shaka Khan. Records that have a lot of dynamic range, that have a lot of soul, that have a lot of sonics playing. And so that's what I try to do to keep that up, you know.
And who are some of the radio personalities that you keep up with their work?
Initially I studied a lot of old recordings from Frankie Crocker of WBLS. He's no longer with us, but he was a legend to me. I studied him. I also love one of the greatest satirists of all time is Howard Stern. I'm a Stern head. I think he's funny and he's smart. And I love the way that he delivers content. And so I listen to him. I also listen to Joy Reid. I love the way that she presents her political shows on the weekend, AM Joy. I can go on, but I try to listen to, I love independent media, so I love the Young Turks and the way that they have a very passionate about the way that they deliver the news. And so when I'm doing my radio program, which is called the Freedom Radio Hour, I try to have a mix of all of that, some passionate, fiery discussion mixed with, some lighthearted stuff, because I think we can't take ourselves too seriously, right?
Right. And what have been some of the most memorable discussions you think have emerged from your platforms?
A few. I think I'm covering very heavily the streaming wars. And for those that don't know what that means, that is essentially the birth of streaming services vying for your subscription dollar. They want you to pay them $10 a month for unlimited consumption of music. And so I've been obsessed with the streaming wars because what this means is that companies are fighting each other for consolidation of power, and they do it in a myriad of ways. Spotify, for example, did it by keeping their costs down, having a free trial for a while, and then also going public on the stock market. They are now worth billions of dollars by doing a myriad of things, including what I just mentioned. So I study those things very carefully because I feel like there's information that we need to know as an artist. In particular, I noticed that companies started to make their fortunes off the back of music, but us creatives, we didn't earn any equity, meaning that we ought to have earned a share in, say, Apple as it continued to build its empire around gadgets. Why? Because it wouldn't have had gadgets without music in them. So we ought to have had some share. So I study a lot of that. So my book called Free the Music Business, Tips and Tales from an Indie Music Nerd, is me going down this rabbit hole of information because at one point in my professional life, it quite literally collided with my job. I literally give out royalties and pay royalties to over a dozen artists. So it's very important for me to know the dollars and cents of things, how much music is being earned in a streaming setting. And in fact, we're earning a fraction of a penny per stream. So I have to count on you, Jewel, and your listeners to listen to my music thousands, millions of times for me to get the equivalent of what would pay a cable bill or a cell phone bill. If you don't believe me, look up Pharrell Williams and his case against YouTube. After Happy became a humongous hit for him, he got a check from YouTube for $9,600 after millions and millions of stream counts on that platform. So you can imagine, granted, it's not the totality of his income for the song, but just from the one platform, having all those stream counts and getting less than $10,000. Meanwhile, YouTube is earning billions and billions of dollars. To the fact now, Apple, they're even past the billion mark. They're at 1 trillion right now, and they wouldn't be anywhere near that without music and media.
Wow.
So I study that. And so the book is talking about that chronology, how we came to be that way and how my real life experience was juxtaposed with that reality.
What were some of the challenges that you had to overcome and anything that you've learned throughout the process of writing Free the Music Business?
In terms of writing the book or I guess both are important. One challenge that I realized right away is that I love house music, which if anybody knows is a sort of extension or an extrapolation of disco. And so I love house music. It started in Chicago and then it became popular around the world. So I noticed that when I was working at my record labels, and I own 2 to this day, so I'm still very, very heavily involved to this day, there's an insistence on propping up old models. Let me say that again. There's an insistence on holding up old models and saying, this is the way it used to be. Why do we do that? My answer always is because we're in a new time and those old models don't work in this setting, and here's why they don't work. So the book talks about that, and I think our biggest challenge in the industry, and I argue worldwide, is our insistence on propping up old models. We ought to break ourselves, and free the music business so that we can come up with new ways to generate income, because computer companies have done it. They figured it out long ago. We're still like crabs in a barrel fighting for little things, and we're not realizing that we created the barrel itself. We could break it free and start something fresh. And I think we're not paying attention, and we ought to, especially now with Congress having to step in to launch the Mechanical Licensing Collective, which is a way to deal with a lot of lost income to artists when people are streaming their content. Why? Because they can't find them to pay them. So there's an issue, and Congress has had to step in. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges there. One of the biggest challenges of writing a book is I'm a family man. I have 3 young kids, 8, 12, and 13, 2 daughters and a son, and I have 2 jobs. So writing this book was like 5 minutes every day, and so there's a challenge there. And you also need therapy to figure out your feelings while writing the book. It was quite personal. As you mentioned, I'm talking about the death of my dad and other traumas in my life. I share some other things, very personal stuff. So therapy was very important. I also found a great book editor, Amanda Fontani. She's actually an AP teacher at Medgar Evers in Brooklyn. Shout out to Amanda. And I found a fantastic book cover designer named Jose Gonzalez, phenomenal graphic artist. Search him out as well. So those things were challenges, but I found ways to make it through. And then putting it out was a challenge because I didn't want to put only a book out. That's why I also have a Kindle out, both on Amazon, the physical and the Kindle. And I have an audio book on Audible, and I have a soundtrack that's available on all digital platforms of music that inspired me as I was having my time running labels and as well as writing the book. So that's out now too.
That is wonderful. I also want to talk about a quote that you include in Free the Music Business. I'm going to read part of it. It comes from David Bowie. If you feel safe in the area you're working in, you're not working in the right area. So how did you choose that quote, and were there any others that you wanted to use, and why did this one make the cut?
Yeah, so my editor said, you really need to think about an epigraph. So I'm like, oh, right. I didn't even think about it. It's one of those last things why? Because you want to give a sense of the author's perspective right away. You need something succinct that gives you an idea of what you're about to read. And so an epigraph is a wonderful way to get that vibe out, that energy out to the reader right away. And David Bowie, to me, is just symbolic of so many things to me. He's ultimate freedom. Remember, I'm talking about free the music business. So to me, he's very free as an artist. He's androgynous. He's both genders. He's fashion before anybody was fashion. He was Grace Jones before Grace Jones. He was before Lady Gaga. All of that. So David Bowie is in a lot of ways very much that ideal person to be quoting for. And what he said was so spot on for the experience. I feel like taking on this book, being a first-time writer, Jewel, is very daunting. It's very scary. You start to challenge your own ideas of confidence, insecurities, all of those things. And that epigraph I read a lot of times before we published because it spoke to me so deeply. So yeah, you got to get into some things that are uncomfortable. That's where true growth comes in. Growth doesn't come in when you do something comfortable over the years, over and over again, right? Growth comes when you dealing with when the rubber hits the road, when you face adversity and you overcome it, right? When you set a goal and you not only meet the goal, but you go beyond the goal. That's what I'm talking about. And I think that quote was symbolic of that, representative of that.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to know too, speaking of goals, how do you stay goal oriented?
Well, if I could be spiritual for a second, I think the pandemic has made me feel like time is so fleeting that tomorrow is not promised. I know it's a cliche at this point, but the pandemic, I lost almost a dozen friends at this point, back to back. I lost a friend, then the wife, then the cousin. Then I lost another friend, his friend as well. And these are all people that, like, we broke bread, we had dinners, we would go and hang out. And one is too many, but a dozen, Jewel, it's just at this point I'm feeling like I stay motivated because I feel like I have children to consider and I want my life to have meaning, and I don't want to just plug away at these things behind the scenes. And my life and my work is quite thankless. It's not very glamorous actually, because you're mostly dealing with negotiations and artists with money get very funny, so you got to be transparent and be a person of integrity while you're dealing with a myriad of emotions around artists and their families and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I just feel like that's sort of the big message I wanted to relay if I could.
You have my condolences, Adam. Wow.
But I think if you think about it though, if you need impetus for or push in your life, something like that is going to push you ahead. Either you're going to be near paralysis like that impacted artist I talked about, or you're going to try to remain productive. And I want to be that embraced artist, that embraced musician. So despite this, I'm trying to write music that's healing. So I am talking about the feeling of people dying. I am talking about politics. I think it's important for artists to talk about current events, because not everything could be like, party it up, dance the night away. I love those records too, but now is the time to let your voice be heard as an artist. And that right there is inspiration to me. So yeah, and I'm always thinking about different things. Like I said, I paired that book with a myriad of radio interviews, with a soundtrack, with an audiobook. I even wrote a grant for a one-day music conference. I plan to bring the music conference back again once we're a little bit freer and clearer from this pandemic. But yeah, so I'm always thinking about that and more. I have other ambitions. I think the takeaway here is dream really, really big, not just big, but really big. Why? Because you will mess around and achieve your dream, and it actually will be really sad to you. You feel depressed by achieving the dream because you think to yourself, at least for me, wow, I didn't dream big enough. And so I had to make a whole new sheet of goals and make them really huge. And so now I'm on a new quest.
Adam Cruz, everyone. Wow, Adam, thank you so much for talking with us today. You're somebody who has, I have to talk to you again, seriously.
Thank you for having me on, sincerely.
Of course, like it was an absolute pleasure. Tell us about any upcoming projects that you can share, because you're going to be releasing a single, right?
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. You can check me out at djadamcruz.com. The song is called Quien Será Mi Santo. It's a Latin song, and it's basically asking the question of which of the saints would claim me, and which is a very touchy song for me to put out, because I just told you, I grew up Pentecostal, and talking about, Yemaya, Ochun, Yemaya, all that stuff is very much like the devil to parts of my family. So it is quite scary. But going back to the epigraph, this new single coming out on July 3rd is me stepping out and doing another thing that's scary to me, but feels good and feels like progress. So I'm going to continue to release songs almost every week at djadamcruz.com that are exploring these things that make me nervous, even speaking Spanish. I didn't grow up being taught Spanish. As a matter of fact, our grandmother kind of shied away from that because she thought you'd get more ahead in your life if you married a white person, or at the very least assimilated. So the notion of keeping up Spanish was like, oh no, you're not gonna make it. So, and I know now my mother was like, no, it wasn't really quite like that, but it was. When we started to speak, we were made fun of a little because we sounded cute. And so I had a little bit of a phobia. So I didn't learn Spanish until I was an adult. And I started to surround myself with people that spoke choppy Spanish like I did. And then we all kind of we all realized that we were all being grown up the same way, where we didn't learn like that. We knew it perfectly. We just didn't speak it well. But now I feel great. So that's why I'm singing a lot in Spanish.
So you feel like it's never too late to pick up a language?
Never. And especially now when you're older and you have more perspective of why parents do what they do, you could start to unlearn some of those things. Like nobody says that you get to keep this old baggage. You get to re-educate yourself. That's the beauty of life, right? So I feel like free the music business is not just the business parts of it, although it is certainly that. It's also like thinking of new ways for your own self. Like, we're in 2020, y'all. Let's get it together. Let's find a new way to break free from whatever's holding you back in your own life, and look deeply within yourself. What's that creative dream for yourself? What is the goal that you want for yourself ultimately? Whatever it is, there's no time like today. And today, you are going to be the youngest you'll ever be. So you better do it now.
All right. And how have people responded to Free the Music Business so far?
It's been really interesting. I have gotten some really deep, long letters from people that have just feel like they didn't know. And they're like, I'm so glad you wrote this because I didn't know. And what I mean by that is they didn't know this history of streaming music and how we got to this problem of a fraction of a penny per stream. They also didn't know the intricacies of working at a label like that. And so I think I've been getting a lot of positive feedback, but I've gotten some pushback. I'm talking about a couple of things that have gotten some critique. Like, I think we are experiencing a gentrification of art in 3 very specific ways, and you can read my book for the details. So I've gotten some pushback about that because gentrification definitely includes a level of violence in order to achieve a goal of cleansing a community, revitalizing, renovating, whatever they call it. So while what I'm talking about is gentrification of art, it's a little bit different. So some of the critique has been around that. And some of the critique has been people that don't think that streaming is an issue. They think it's great. It actually stopped piracy for them. They don't see the big deal. Their answer is hustle up. You know, pull yourselves up by the bootstraps. But I'm saying, hold on, we're not all starting in the same place. You know, isn't that a microcosm of the world too? Hold up, before you say things are a certain way, let's educate ourselves and realize that what we did was let computer companies dictate where we are, and we're letting corporations dictate our music. And we need to pay attention, because in short order, Jewel, we're about to have a situation where the same company that is in charge of your music and whether you could access it or not is also the same company that's going to be in charge of your internet connection and whether you have access to the internet or not. So imagine putting all that power into one company. Let's all think about that for a moment, you know?
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about. Oh my goodness. Adam, would you consider writing a novel that relates to your career?
It's so funny you say that. That's a great question, because when I first started to write this book, I thought for a minute maybe it should be a novel. But then I'm like, wait a minute, why is that? Because I wanted to tell this chronology, right? So I don't think it fit well. But now maybe, I also thinking about a script. I've had some aspirations to write a script, so maybe I'll do that. You know?
Yes.
Great idea. Thank you, Joel.
Oh, of course, Adam. You should definitely go for that, you know? Yeah. So how can people stay updated and stay connected with all the fabulous work that you're doing and get in touch with you and get the book?
Yes, again, thank you so much for taking this time. I really appreciate it. You can check out my book, Free the Music Business, Tips and Tales from an Indie Music Nerd. It's available on Amazon, like I said. There's a Kindle version on Amazon. Also an audiobook that I narrated that's available on Audible. Also, there's a soundtrack that's available on all platforms, including all of my music. Search out Adam Cruz on all of your favorite digital platforms, and look out for the new single called Quien Será Mi Santo. Fantastic Latin jam is coming out. Check out djadamcruz.com every Friday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I play 5 hours of fantastic house music, and I also talk music, business, news, and trends. So join us.
Yes, definitely join, guys. Make sure that you stay tuned with Adam and check him out. You know, you're awesome, Adam.
Thank you so much. Likewise.
Thank you to all the listeners, and until next time, so booking cool.